Hello guys, I am back with another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and the message reads like this. Hello my brother, how are you? I am someone that have his own story that I want to share with you. And at the end of the day, I ask myself a lot of questions and I do not have any answers to the questions that I have. My story started when I was still in South Africa. I was working with this other man. When I was working with that man, I noticed that he was someone who really enjoyed everything that was traditional. Yes, there was no problem with him being a traditional man, but he was the one who encouraged me to go and get these money-making rituals. The reason why he encouraged me, it was because he said that I had a lot of bad luck. The company that I was working for, sometimes we will get paid, then sometimes we will never get paid. I was working as a security guard when I was in South Africa. In that company that I was working, I can say that we were only two guys who were foreign nationals, so we were not getting the same salary as the other guys whom we were working with. Because they were South Africans, they used to get paid on the 28th of each and every month. But as for me and the other guy that I was working with, who was from Mozambique, sometimes we will get our salaries on the 7th or maybe on the 9th of each and every month. Life was really tough for me and that guy whom I was working with. Then he told me that before I had started working for that company, everything was going well. He was being treated as if he was an equal partner. But when I joined that company, that is when he started to notice that he was now getting paid less and he was no longer getting paid like the rest of the guys whom we were working with. So he said that it meant that it was me who had brought bad luck in that company that I was working for. And I want to admit that there is something that is called bad luck. At first, when he told me that maybe I have bad luck, I didn't even agree with everything that he was telling me. But when I looked at my life, even from the time when I was still back home in my country, my life was full of bad luck. When I arrived in South Africa, I faced so many challenges before I finally got employed by that company. Before I did these rituals, whenever I would associate with someone, it didn't matter how successful that person was, but the moment that the person tries to help me, his life will be full of bad luck. There was once a pastor who even told me that I have bad luck. This was quite surprising to me that a pastor can actually refuse to help me because he claimed that I have bad luck. That pastor who had tried to help me, it was when I was still back home in my country. When I went to his church and when I had accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, I then gave my testimony. And when I gave my testimony, everyone was really sad. When the pastor was preaching, that is when he asked me to see him after the sermon. After church, I went and I spoke with him. Then he told me that he wanted me to work as his gardener, even though he had another gardener. The following Monday morning, I walked, I don't know for how many kilometers, because the pastor was not staying in the same location. His house was somewhere else, far from the church. So I had to walk because I didn't have any money at all. I started walking somewhere around 3 a.m. Then I arrived at the pastor's house. It was at 8 a.m. in the morning. It was quite a long distance, and I walked for the whole week before the pastor found out that I was walking to and from work. When he tried to help me further by buying me a bicycle, that is when he claimed that suddenly he was starting to notice that his life, he was now facing a lot of challenges and bad luck. I could not believe it. The day that the pastor fired me, it was not even before month end when he fired me, but he gave me a full month's salary. Then he told me to not come back to his church I had to go and look for help somewhere else. This was quite surprising to me. But after that pastor had fired me, I understood the situation, because when I started working for him, his child had an accident and the child broke his arm. The child was just playing in a tree. It was not even a big tree. He was just playing in a very small tree, but when the child fell, then he broke his arm. His wife had gone to buy some groceries. She was also involved in an accident, but she came out of that accident without being damaged. But the car, it was damaged beyond recognition. That is when the pastor told me that whilst he was praying, he was shown in a vision that I had to be separated from him. If I tell you everything that happened in my life, it can actually take the whole day. Whilst you'll be narrating my story, a lot of stuff happened to me. When I finally came to South Africa, I thought that maybe things were going to change. I thought that finally I was going to leave the curse behind. But there is something about these evil spirits. They will follow you wherever you will go. Even if you go into a land that is full of opportunities, other people, they will be getting those opportunities, but you will never enjoy anything. When I arrived in South Africa, I started working for this company. It was called Mapo. I don't know if that company is still there. When I was working for that company, everyone in that company started to hate me. The reason why everyone was hating me, it was because whenever I would go to another post, if I was going to work at that post, then the client will suddenly withdraw our services. Since I was someone who was from outside of the country, I used to go to the posts that were on the farms. That is where I used to go and guard. Whenever I would go to another farm, then suddenly the owner of that farm, he would start to hate me. There was this other white farmer. He hated me so much, and I do not know why he hated me, but I do not blame him, because I know that wherever I was going, there was an evil spirit that was causing bad luck in my life. So what that white farmer did, he could not find any reason for him to cancel that contract that he had gave to my boss. So what he did is that for many nights he would go around his farm and he was just looking for an opportunity when he would find me sleeping. And I knew that this was what he was doing. So I made sure that I'll never fall asleep on the job. But the salary that I was getting, it was not enough. And because we were only getting paid sometimes on the 7th or on the 9th day of the following month, I never had any money. Because I never had any money, sometimes I had to do some other piece jobs. I had found a piece job. There was this other old lady that wanted me to make some cement bricks for her. I worked so hard on that day because I needed some money. When it was time for me to go to work, I was really sleepy. When I went back to work, I waited for everyone to fall asleep, and this was somewhere around 8 p.m. Then I looked for a certain place so that I can fall asleep, but I only fell asleep for about an hour. Then I heard that white man kicking me, and the way that he was shouting at me, I think that already he had been waiting somewhere, just waiting for me to fall asleep. After he had caught me sleeping, he then called my boss and he cancelled the contract. But when I started working for him, I had heard other guys that I was working with, they said that this man, he had been saying that he wanted to cancel this contract for a couple of months. But I think that when my boss told me to go and work at that farm, that is when that white farmer found the opportunity to cancel the contract. After that contract had been cancelled, a lot of people in that company started to hate me because they thought that I was the one who was bringing in a lot of bad luck. That is when that man who was from Mozambique approached me, and he told me that he knew this other certain gentleman who was staying in Johannesburg who could assist me. He said that if I was going to go to Joburg, that man was going to wash me clean. And the way that he told me that I was going to be washed clean, I thought that there was no rituals that was involved because he said that the only thing that I needed to buy was pink salt and some garlic. Then the man was going to wash me. Me and that guy from Mozambique, we traveled all the way from Vivo. At that time, that is where I was working. I was really tired of this bad luck. When we arrived in Johannesburg, we then went to his relative's house. Then we later went to that traditional healer. When I arrived at that traditional healer's house, that is when he told me to go into another room so that I can wash myself with pink salt and garlic. I did everything as I had been instructed. But after I had done everything, that is when the dreams started to come to me. And on that very first night, after I had performed that ritual, that is when I started to have a strange dream. In my dream, I kept on seeing this man. I started to experience that in the room where I'll be sleeping, there will be an invisible person that would enter into that room. Sometimes I would even wake up in the middle of the night. Then I will hear that there was someone who will be talking in the room where I will be. But the invisible person that will be talking in my room, it seemed as if he was speaking a strange language that I could not understand. So I just let it go. Then I migrated back home. When I came back home, I got married to my wife. After I had married my wife, she had 2 miscarriages, and I could not understand what was causing all of these miscarriages, because when I was in South Africa, my mom had died, my father had married again, and this did not sit well with the rest of his relatives because he had not respected the memory of my mother. So everyone was just saying that my stepmom was the one who had killed my mom. So when I got married and when there was a challenge that my wife kept on having miscarriages, that is when I decided to go and do a go back to sender. But my brother, I didn't know that when I went to do a go back to sender, I was doing more rituals on top of more rituals. Those rituals that I had done whilst I was still in South Africa, they were the ones that were causing my wife to have a miscarriage. And by the time when I went to do a go back to sender, that is when that invisible man started to appear to me. And the way that the invisible man was appearing to me, the first night when I saw him, me and my wife, we were just sleeping. Then suddenly I found myself sitting outside, and I didn't know how I had managed to open the door and lock the door whilst I was fast asleep. When I was still wondering, that is when I saw a man. He was walking into the yard where me and my wife were renting at that time. Then he sat down beside me. But before he sat down beside me, he pressed his thumb on my forehead, and he told me that he did this because I had to be strong enough. He wanted to strengthen my heart. After he had strengthened my heart, that is when that old man told me that it was just a spirit of a very young man who had been murdered there in South Africa. Then his part was used for these money-making rituals. When I had traveled all the way from Vivo going to Johannesburg, the moment that the traditional healer told me to go into another room so that I can bath, I took this container that I had found in that room. Then I went and I collected some water so that I can bath. That spiritual old man told me that the container that I had used, it was not a clean container. It was a container which had been used when they were harvesting that young man's body parts. So that container had not been cleansed. So when I was using that container, that is when the spirit of that young man who had been murdered for ritualistic purpose started to follow me around. And that spirit told me that it wanted to offer me some help and it wanted to give me some riches. I was really scared, but at the same time, I was really excited. And the reason why this spirit was now able to communicate with me, it was because when I had gone to do that go back to sender, I had managed to open up my spiritual ears. It told me not to be afraid, for it was here to assist me to get rich. I didn't know that in the end, this spirit was going to demand a lot of sacrifices from me. Then it told me that I had to start up a very small business and I didn't have any money. But it just said, when you will be walking one day, you are going to come across a wallet that will be full of money. Do not remove that money from the wallet. All that you have to do is you need to go and start a small business with that money. One day when I wanted to go to town, I was in a taxi. The person who was sitting right next to me, when he was getting off the taxi, because in my country most of the taxis are always overloaded, when that man got off from the taxi, he dropped down his wallet. I took his wallet, not knowing what was inside the wallet. When I got off from the taxi, I counted the money. That is the money that I used to travel coming to Messina. I then purchased some boxes of Omo washing powder. That is the business that I started with. Right now, I have a lot of cars and I am in the business of buying land and reselling that land to people who will be looking for residential stands. I am someone who is really successful in life. After I had found my success, then that spirit came back to me and it told me that I had to buy a clay pot, but it was supposed to be black in color without any traditional designs on it. It was supposed to have a plain design. I went around looking for a black clay pot, the exact size that it had told me. It had showed me in a vision the kind of a clay pot that it wanted me to buy. So I went to the marketplace, then I bought a big clay pot, not knowing what was the purpose of buying this clay pot. It told me that I had to travel with this clay pot back to our village. At that time, I was busy renovating the house that belonged to my parents back in the village, because my father was just a poor man. When he died, the houses that he left behind, they were not of good standards. Because now I had a lot of money, I was busy renovating back in our village. That spirit told me that back in our village, I had to build another 3-roomed house, and this 3-roomed house that I was going to build in the village, no one but one of my workers whom I was going to look for, he was supposed to stay in that 3-roomed house. I don't know why that spirit told me to do this. So I did that. I told the builders that were working for me to start digging up the foundation for that 3-roomed house. After they had completed, I traveled back to the village and I gave them their salaries, and I told them that immediately they had to go back to their homes. I was going to call them. It was sort of a bonus that I was giving them. They were really happy. Those were the instructions that were given to me by that spirit. The spirit had told me that not a single builder is supposed to complete that house. I had to hire and fire a lot of builders before that 3-roomed house could be completed. After I had given the bonuses to the builders who were busy renovating my late parents' house in the village, after they had gone back, I hired another set of builders and they didn't even know what was going on. Before I had hired them, that spirit had told me that I had to dig a hole in the foundation. And after I dug up that hole, I was supposed to bury that clay pot. But when I was supposed to bury that clay pot, I had to put a plastic bag on top of that clay pot. And I had to slaughter some chickens until I had filled up that clay pot with blood. This is what I did. When I traveled from the capital city going back to the village, I had a dozen of chickens at the boot of my car. I then slaughtered those chickens whilst their blood was dripping down into that clay pot. After I had buried that clay pot in the foundation, I then drove off into the bushes where I dumped those bodies of the slaughtered chicken that I had slaughtered. Then I returned back to the capital city. I now understand why that spirit made me to perform that ritual, because as for now, there are 3 people who have tried to work for me, but they keep on telling me that they cannot work for me anymore. They do not give me any reason at all. But I know that there is something that goes on in that 3-roomed house that the spirit made me to build, and it told me that none of my relatives are supposed to stay in that 3-roomed house. And I told all of my relatives that I do not want anyone to go and stay in that 3-roomed house. It doesn't matter how much you have suffered in life. I do not want anyone nearby that house. I just pretend as if I am someone who really cares for his workers. But I think that the spirit, it is using my workers as a form of sacrifice, because one of the families that used to work for me, they only worked for me for a very short period of time. Then the husband just died, and I think that the reason why he died, he was offered as a sacrifice to that spirit. This spirit, it has so much power over me. I've been thinking of demolishing that house so that I can dig up that clay pot, but I am afraid that if people see me digging up that clay pot, they are going to know that I am a ritualist, because back in the village, everyone just looks up to me. Each and every year at our local school, I make sure that I make a lot of donations. I donate school shoes, I donate books, but this thing, it is costing me. It has costed me 2 of my unborn babies. Then it costed me 1 of my baby boy who was born. He just died in very mysterious circumstances. My wife does not suspect anything, but as someone who did all of these rituals, and as someone who has witnessed, and as someone who has experienced this spiritual side of life, I know that there is a higher possibility. My son was also a victim of these rituals that I did. Whenever I try to communicate with this spirit concerning the blood that it made me to pour into that clay pot, the spirit will get so angry. And whenever that spirit will get angry with me, I will start to have bad luck in my life. Then it will remind me of all the bad luck that I once had in my life. Then I will stop to question that spirit anymore. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received from one of our listeners. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation of this message. The things that we do for money. Please let us talk about this issue in the comment section.